you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
What you're watching is the final interview between Jeffrey Epstein and former White House strategist Steve Bannon, shot in 2019, just months before Epstein's death. When the DOJ finally released documents and footage, this was one of the most talked about pieces to surface. Epstein's world was crumbling at this point, so this interview was meant to be a spin piece to do damage control. But people immediately noticed that the conversation had a very bizarre feeling to it. So today, I want to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how manipulation is actually packaged. On the surface, Epstein's final interview looks pretty straightforward. It's your typical rich and famous person being interviewed, but from a branding and PR perspective, when you look closer, there is a ton going on here. Throughout the footage, Epstein obsessively steers the conversation away from his criminal reality by anchoring his self-worth to his past roles with prestigious people and institutions. By holding on to these specific elite titles, he attempted to signal that his mind was far too valuable to be judged by standard legal and moral frameworks. And if you're new here, I'm Sam Ross, and I help personal and emerging brands increase their perceived value. So I've spent my career examining the art of persuasion and influence and figuring out exactly what makes us trust certain people. I look at how they talk, how they position themselves, and how they get an audience to buy into their narrative. So I'm going to show you how he uses the mechanics of branding to manufacture perceived authority so effectively, he was able to convince the most powerful people on earth to trust him. We're going to look at all of it. We're going to look at the word choice, the body language, the verbal and visual cues, all the brand elements to help answer the question I think we've all been asking ourselves. How did this guy get to be so powerful? How did a college dropout and former math teacher at New York City's Dalton School claw his way to money, power, and fame and ultimately architect the world's biggest sex trafficking conspiracy in modern history? So let's start with the optics, the visual cues, which, make no mistake, are made with intention. When you look at this frame, you notice the setting. He's in a beautiful, expensive room. The background is blurred, but you still get a strong sense of the space. There are these giant oak or mahogany doors leading to a large, expansive hall. And you can see beyond in the hallway, there's other tall doors leading to other rooms. Also, notice the furniture. The chair he's sitting in, it's covered in this velvety, luxurious fabric, and it's just the perfect color to complement the wood and the rest of the room. And you just get the clear sense that this is a very, very expensive home. And interestingly, this is not just any home or set or a hotel suite. This is actually Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the entire country. Now, they could have done this interview anywhere, but a very deliberate choice is being made here to film it in Epstein's personal surroundings, and I believe it's for two reasons. First, they immediately want to start off the interview showing a strong visual contrast between the images that we've seen of him up to this point in 2019 of being on trial in West Palm Beach and in mugshots, all of these images with like the darker, shadowy pictures and the unflattering light. And they want to contrast it with the current scene of this interview. Now, when we see him sitting in this incredible room, in this incredible home, it creates distance from those images. And it replaces them psychologically and creates a more recent imprint in our minds in an attempt to neutralize those images of him as a criminal. The second reason is to give Epstein the home court advantage, right? He's in his own surroundings, he's in control, he's comfortable there. He is not the guest. He's not in the hot seat. He's sitting in his own furniture, in his own office, in his own house, completely in command of all of the surroundings. Now let's look at what he's wearing. And this is actually really interesting because later on he makes a very abrupt choice, seemingly out of nowhere, but we're going to get to that a little later. In this segment, he's decided to wear a clean, crisp, neatly pressed white button-down shirt, the staple item for the white-collar, upper echelon businessman. Now, white often symbolizes purity, innocence, cleanliness, even new beginnings. And unlike a color like red, which is emotionally charged and often evokes a lot of strong feelings, which then create connection, the color white is generally not emotionally charged. So in branding and visual storytelling, it can signal wealth, luxury, control, perfection, and it provides distance. So when someone dresses in white, it can also project cleanliness and prestige. Think of the traditional chef whites. White jackets are the choice for chefs to signal cleanliness and sanitization around food. But depending on the context, white can also feel unsettling because it can suggest moral elevation or trying to appear clean when, like in this situation, it's anything but. Also notice his posture. The signal he sends is entirely relaxed. It's almost expansive. You naturally expect defensive body language from a convicted criminal sitting in a room answering questions. I mean, a normal person would maybe shrink down in the chair or cross their arms to protect themselves and have that sort of more guarded body language. But Epstein does none of that. In fact, he does the exact opposite. He takes up space and at times he's leaning back like he's holding court, and the psychological effect of that posture is intimidation. It forces the interviewer to work harder to break through his level of comfort. When we connect these visual cues, we see how the optics manufacture his power. He uses his clothes and his body to signal that he operates completely above the standard rules. And it strikes a very powerful contrasting image, and it's one being helmed by Epstein to control our perception of him. Next, we're going to look at a clip that shows us another layer in the mechanics of perception, and in this case, deception. But first, what you just saw is how someone uses something as simple as visual cues to manipulate the world. But real authority comes from building a brand that's consistent both inside and out. When my client Lonnie came to me, she was struggling with a serious case of brand mismatch. She helps working moms overcome chaos so they can have their careers and family without stress and mom guilt. So she really had to be real with these women to gain their trust and connection quickly. But her whole brand image came off as masculine and clinical and cold, so her expertise didn't matter. She was unrelatable. We worked together to transform her forward-facing brand and image so it authentically matched what was going on inside. Her depth, her warmth, her realness, and her authority. Now, if you want to increase your perceived authority and you feel like you're having some brand mismatching going on, then check out the link below in the description and you can book a brand audit with me. So now let's get back to how Epstein used language as a weapon.
What was going to happen to Lehman Brothers, and what did you immediately think when you heard they was going to be put into bankruptcy?
I'm glad you asked that question. I was in solitary confinement September 14th. And again, some of the public stories about the wonderful time I had in jail and my work release, which didn't come till months after. I'd been there since June in an 8x10 cell with a bed in the back, a 6-foot bed in the back, a chrome sink with a toilet attached to it, and a little piece of metal sticking out that was supposed to act as a table. Now, since I was in jail, there were no books. Why? There's no library. No library, but you're in jail. No, I was in jail, not prison. So in jail, I was in a place which was called the Special Housing Unit, which is for the roughest, toughest, meanest people. They had put me there, they said, for my own protection. So I was in an 8x10 cell with a little slit in the door where they would serve my food on a tray about 9 inches by 4 inches. And then as soon as I finished eating, they would take the tray and close it down. And one of the guards said, "Do you understand there's Wall Street's crashing. I'm worried about my pension fund. What should I do?" And I said, "Sorry, Wall Street's crashing? What's happened?" And he said, "There's some crisis and some companies are going bankrupt." I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yeah, it's all over the papers. We're all terrified. We're going to lose our life savings because we have either a 401k or our pension funds. We don't know anything about money. Mr. Epstein, can you tell us, like, what's going on? Am I going to be able to afford my children's education? Am I going to be bankrupt like this company called Lehman Brothers?" And there's another company in the front page today called Bear Stearns. "Oh, no," I said. Why? Because that's the company I was a partner in. And in fact, that was a company I had a very large investment in. So, as a great story, I didn't have my Wall Street Journal, but in the early mornings, you're allowed to make 2 phone calls, collect. And when you pick up the phone, you can dial a number, and when the person picks up, they say, you're getting a call from the Palm Beach County Jail. Will you accept reverse charges? And the person either says yes, and the call goes through, or the person says no. The person I had called was Jimmy Kane, the president of Bear Stearns. And I said, tell me what's going on. And so that my knowledge of the financial crisis happened with Jimmy, who was at the center of the storm, telling me about what Lehman had gone under, and they were trying to figure out a way, should they bail out Bear Stearns?
Okay, notice when Bannon asks him how he found out about the collapse of Lehman Brothers, Epstein doesn't give a straight answer because he is not talking to communicate. He talks to dominate the space and establish a strict hierarchy of intelligence. And he does that by building a linguistic architecture to reclaim his status. He describes his jail cell with clinical sensory detail, right? The 8x10 room, the chrome sink with a toilet attached, the little piece of metal sticking out for a table. But then he immediately pivots to the language of high finance. He starts talking about Wall Street and Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. He takes control of the narrative by painting this genius in exile image. And he does it by using something called contrast loading. By using sensory language and gritty detail, he's creating a visual environment that lies in stark contrast to the environment he's now sitting in as a free man. All of this signals to the audience he wasn't a prisoner. He's just a Wall Street partner who happens to be sitting in a cell. Then he uses another technique when describing how the prison guard comes to him for advice and reassurance, right? The guy comes in and he's like, Mr. Epstein, can you tell us what's going on? Am I going to be able to afford my children's education?
We have either a 401k or our pension funds. We don't know anything about money. Mr. Epstein, can you tell us, like, what's going on?
He sets up this kind of subordinate dialogue, right? Like by painting the guard as desperate and financially illiterate, Epstein positions himself as the oracle. He's essentially telling us that even the people locking him up came to him for wisdom. And this is a pure dominance move. Even though I'm technically the prisoner, I'm still in charge. And it's an effective story to help shape perception because the guard's panic makes his own expert status look even bigger. And it ultimately accomplishes something Epstein feeds off of, which is to reinforce the idea that he's fundamentally different, more important and more valuable than anyone else. And then he does this weird thing where he talks about the rule where he gets 2 collect phone calls a day, and he proceeds to explain the process of getting a collect call, which is weird. It's like most people understand that process. You pick up the receiver and you hear the automated voice on the other end. Only in this case, it's the voice saying, you're getting a collect call from the Palm Beach County Jail. And then you wait for the other person to pick it up and accept the charges. And of course, who is on the other end? Jimmy Kane, the president of Bear Stearns. Can you just imagine that for a second? The president of Bear Stearns is getting a collect call from the Palm Beach County Jail, and he accepts it. Why? Because Jeffrey Epstein is important, and he wants you to know that. The inference here is extreme proximity, and he's doing something called status anchoring. His peers aren't the people in the special housing unit. His peers run global banks. By casually dropping the name Jimmy Kane, he signals that his image is still entirely intact. He might be in solitary confinement, but the people who run the world still pick up when he calls. And through all of this, his tone stays completely flat. He never raises his voice or infuses emotion, which suggests a person completely detached from the moral weight of his situation. Now in branding, panic signals weakness. But a calm tone in a crisis signals authority, and it minimizes the seriousness. He projects that he's so far above the situation, he can analyze the global economy collapsing while sitting next to a chrome toilet. All right, so now let's move on from the verbal branding and look at the specific mechanics of how he dodges direct hits. You can identify the exact moment this happens when Bannon wants to know how Epstein ended up in a 6x9 jail cell. Watch how he evades the question in real time.
Did it strike you at the time of the mess you had made of your life to be in a situation that you're one of the greatest financial minds in the world, looked at by world leaders and asked their, your thinking by the most prominent and important people in the world, and here you are in solitary confinement. You got to make a collect call to somebody. Did it strike you at the time how all the threads of your life had come together and put you in a position, or you had put yourself in that position?
No.
Okay, there is a lot going on in that clip. Bannon is basically building a massive bridge for Epstein to walk across. He is literally handing him a redemption arc on a silver platter. Now, when someone is in a PR crisis and they give an interview, there is a moment that tees up the fall from grace trope. Every PR crisis interview has this moment. And most people know this moment is coming. It's what they've been waiting for because it's their chance at redemption. So they try to lean into the "I've learned so much" or "it was a wake-up call" narrative to humanize themselves and win back the audience. Epstein? He replies with one word: no. He offers zero explanation and refuses to accept the premise that he fell at all. In his mind, the brand is still 100% intact, even if he's sitting in a cell. And this reveals something really interesting about the truth of this interview, which is not to spin a tale of redemption or apology or accountability. It's to reinforce the image he wants the entire world to have of him. And we're going to get into that more later. But as you're watching, remember that the number one thing that Epstein values above everything else is to be seen as an intellectual, as a brilliant person. And this moment reveals that his entire reason for doing the interview is to take back control of that narrative and manipulate perception. By giving a one-word answer to a 40-second buildup, he reestablishes dominance to protect his untouchable status at all costs. Now let's watch the spin get even more aggressive. Take a look at how Epstein doesn't just deflect the questions, he completely reauthors the reality of his incarceration to fit his billionaire brand.
You call the president or the head of the CEO of Bear Stearns. The biggest financial event in your life is taking place, of which, one, every important person in the world would be seeking your opinion. Number two would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to apply your craft. Number three, it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make money if you were smart, and obviously you're smart. You're telling me here, truthfully, that it never hit you at all of how you'd ended up in a place where you had to make a collect phone call from a jail cell that was 6x9 with a steel bed and your food being passed into a slot.
The question you want to ask is, who was the other call to?
Okay. Who was the other call to?
The other call was to my friend at J.P. Morgan, who was then, I didn't know it at the time, trying to buy Bear Stearns. So at one point, I had two phones. It was difficult because they're afraid people are going to hang themselves with the phone cord. So they don't actually come together and they're pretty short. So I was actually going between two phones talking to Bear Stearns and J.P. Morgan at the same time. So I found it amusing.
And it never struck you about how to end up in a situation like this?
No, that would be probably means I would be too self-aware.
You can't possibly expect me to believe this.
I know. I don't believe it.
It's no,
Even
you're telling me that during that day, you never had a moment. You sat there and go, "What have I done with my life? That I'm in a 6x9 jail cell when I should be on a trading desk, or I should be in my $250 million, greatest townhouse in New York City, taking calls from the King of Saudi Arabia, the President of China, the head of Russia, the President of the United States, to save the world's population from a financial debacle." You honestly expect me to believe that never happened?
You're suggesting I was sort of somewhat depressed, and how could this happen to me?
I'm not saying depressed. I'm saying a moment of awareness of how could I get myself into this situation.
No, I would just say how strange that this happens. Just, it's strange, yes.
With no access to books, no access to newspapers,
No access to anything.
You had lived on information.
Except my Almond Joy bars. I had extra Almond Joy bars.
Did you eat Almond Joy bars and things like that because you're afraid of what the cooks did to your food?
Yes.
Is that because of that you were in for the crimes that you were in for?
No, it was just in fact, I
Is
was...
it because you're wealthy?
Yes.
How did you know that?
Well, people would constantly come, if I was passing by or have to go for my medical, people would either ask to borrow money or make some other types of comments about...
And
in the beginning...
What were the comments? At the beginning, what were the comments?
It serves you rich guys right that you're here next to me.
There was nothing about your crimes.
No.
So all this rumor you hear all the time about people in prison that commit the type of crimes you commit, you're saying in your personal thing is not true.
No.
It was all because you were rich.
Yes.
And it was all because they wanted to borrow money.
Or get advice. Yes.
Wait, they get advice to
stock
go long,
Yes,
Are you telling me
is this time to buy?
You're telling me in solitary confinement they're interested in going long?
Yeah. They want to know what
What does that say
stocks...
about human nature?
Well, what I think that people find, one of the reasons they wanted to keep me in solitary confinement was they're afraid that everybody would want to know which stocks to buy. But what happened was...
Okay, so that is really interesting to watch because you're actually starting to see Epstein kind of go off the rails. It's subtle, but it's happening. Bannon pushes him 3 times to admit he felt regret, but Epstein literally interrupts him and changes the subject back to something that allows him to spin the narrative. The question you want to ask is, who was the other call to? This is a classic, don't look over here, look over there moment. So why does he steer the conversation in this direction? Is it just to avoid? No, it's a blatant narrative hijack, and the effect tells the audience, my shame is not important. What actually matters is my access. Somehow he finds a way to make the reality of his jail cell almost comical and elevated by steering the conversation toward the glamour of juggling Bear Stearns and JP Morgan on 2 separate prison phones. It's more like a high-stakes business thriller for him with intrigue and mystery rather than a man who's actually been charged with heinous sexual crimes. And then Bannon asks a direct question about his crimes. He wants to know if the other inmates targeted him because of what he was actually in for. And Epstein immediately shuts the whole idea down, and he claims people only bothered him because he was wealthy. This is the ultimate spin. By using strategic relabeling, he swaps the predator label for a plutocrat label, so the audience believes the only reason people hated him in jail was simply class envy. I mean, hey, okay, being a hated rich guy still carries a level of status, right? It's better than the label of a convicted predator, which is ultimately the kiss of death for a brand. He pushes this absurdist branding even further when he talks about solitary confinement. The guy claims the guards kept him in the special housing unit not for his own protection, but because they were afraid everybody would want to know which stocks to buy. This is a total refusal of reality and revisionist history. Okay, so your intellectual authority is so potent it creates a security risk in prison. That's what he wants us to believe. Now let's take a look at the moment about halfway through the interview when Epstein does a rebrand of his image. And remember earlier when I told you how he made that bizarre, abrupt choice? Well, this is it. He changes his clothes and puts on a black button-down shirt. In visual branding, black is the color of power, sophistication, and authority. This wardrobe change sets up a massive shift in identity from financial intellectual genius to philosophical creative thinker. Now he's the detached observer of life. And this pivot sets up the exact philosophical stance he uses to dodge accountability for the rest of the interview. Check it out.
Cannot tell me sometime during that day you did not have that conversation with yourself of how did I do this to myself to put myself in West Palm Beach in a 6x9 cell with a metal bed with a brown shirt that said trustee spelled wrong.
So did I find it amazing that I was there? That's a
Not amazing, and I don't want to say it was not funny. Oh, I thought it was.
I wasn't funny.
Right.
But
not amazing.
It was incredible.
Incredible in what way?
This
Incredible, like how do I do this to myself?
No. It's as incredible as me sitting here in this house. They're both just 2 sides of the coin. That's how I think about it. That my life today is incredible.
Do you consider yourself a Stoic?
No. I consider myself a hermit.
being a hermit then, being in that 6x9 cell, being in the cell qua the cell was not the problem, right?
Correct.
What was the problem?
Eating the Almond Joy bars.
Because you couldn't eat the food.
No, right.
Did that ever strike you that I can't eat the food because somebody might have done something to it? I gotta live off an Almond Joy bar, 1 a day or 2 a day or whatever. How many ever sneak in a day?
No sneaking in.
Your 1 Almond Joy bar, did not hit you at some time? How the did I do this?
No.
Okay, so this is the part of the interview where things really get weird. It just like moves into a whole other realm that at first really does not make much sense until we look at it more closely. So Bannon pushes him on the sheer irony of his situation, right? He's like, how does a billionaire financial genius end up sleeping on a metal bed behind bars? Epstein replies that that is just as incredible as him sitting in this massive, expensive townhouse right now. They're both just two sides of the same coin. This is a masterclass in weaponizing moral equivalence. If life is just a strange, random coincidence that makes no sense, then he isn't a predator who made calculated choices to hurt people. He is just a particle floating in a complex, chaotic system. And because he's waxing philosophical, Bannon asks if he thinks he's a Stoic. And notice how Epstein says, no, I'm not a Stoic. I'm a hermit. Interesting choice. A hermit implies a choice of total isolation. Again, separation from the rest of us, separation from humanity. These are clues to the fact that he does not think the rules apply to him. He uses this intellectual distance to wash his hands of any personal agency. I mean, you cannot shame a man who views his own jail time as a curious, abstract phenomenon. He even goes so far as to claim the cell itself wasn't really the problem. It was the food. So instead of acknowledging his crimes, the pain he caused, or the heavy weight of how he's ruined his own life and the lives of many others, he starts talking about candy bars. To this guy, the only tragedy of his incarceration was the disruption to his diet. I mean, yes, it shows a staggering lack of empathy, but it's also a typical yet very effective deflection move. It's almost like there's two different conversations going on here. Steve Bannon is on one conversation and Jeffrey Epstein is off having a completely different conversation. And this was really weird. When Epstein mentions that he survived entirely on Almond Joy bars because he was paranoid about being poisoned or killed in jail. Now, hindsight is of course 2020, but looking at that footage now, this detail carries a deeply chilling weight because there's a huge number of people out there who do not believe that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. And so much about his suicide does not add up. So it's really easy to view this moment as perfect foreshadowing that even supports the theory that he did not take his own life. Now, before we get to the most famous part of the interview, watch this clip and notice how Epstein retreats back into his prime identity. As I mentioned earlier, the most important thing to him is that he is viewed as brilliant. His intellectual dominance is completely tied to his image of himself, and keeping that identity intact is the most important thing to him above all else.
There's no question to you that there is some animating life force within us that leaves when you're dead.
Yes, in fact, I refer to the soul. This obviously a certain the questions in the past, even
because
during
people would normally think you were soulless. So
thank you.
Have you talk about you actually believe in it, and have done some thinking about it is pretty shocking in its own right, isn't it?
Well, again, mathematics, Leibniz.
Leibniz, was Leibniz a German professor?
Yes, but what Leibniz said is the soul is so strange because God took chemicals, which is simply the material, like tables, and he somehow made this material able to have a thought. How strange is that?
Okay, did you catch how when Bannon asks him if he believes in a soul, instead of answering in a straightforward way, like a human being, he retreats straight into math history and starts talking about the 1600s and citing Leibniz? I mean, this is something known as status anchoring, and by citing math history, Intellect becomes his own firewall. The man refuses to be known on a human level, even when talking about the essence of life. All right, so let's check out the final clip, and this is without a doubt the most famous exchange of the interview. But for me, it's different for a reason than what most people think. Check it out.
The devil himself said, I'm going to exchange some dollars for your child's life.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
It's a serious question. Do you think you're the devil himself?
I don't know. Why would you say that?
Because you have all the attributes. You're incredibly smart. You remember the devil is somebody
the devil
knows
smart?
The devil's brilliant. You read Milton's Paradise Lost.
No, the devil scares me.
Satan is.
Do you think you're the devil himself? That's what Bannon asks him point blank. And Epstein replies, no, but I do have a good mirror. Now, people usually interpret this literally, assuming he sees the devil in his own reflection or something. I'm not totally sure, but he's revealing a much darker game here. In Faustian and literary themes, the devil's mirror is an actual metaphor for how Satan reflects our own deepest desires back to us in a twisted, inverted, and purely materialistic way to tempt us. When Epstein says he has a good mirror, he is telling us exactly how he operated. And then it's almost like he caught himself and he immediately walks it back. And he weirdly acts confused about, well, why would anyone compare me to the devil? And he plays innocent. And it's like he knows Bannon isn't going to say it's because you're a sexual predator and a convicted felon. It's almost like he baits Bannon into explaining the devil's attributes, like he's fishing for compliments, right? Oh, never mind that I'm the devil because I am, after all, brilliant and beautiful and powerful. And then this is the craziest moment. Epstein says, the devil scares me. And he immediately flashes that slight wry smile like,
Paradise Lost.
No, the devil scares me.
Satan.
A micro expression of duplicity. The words say scared, but the face says satisfied. And that is his tell. And this is so fascinating because while we're examining how Epstein used the mechanics of branding and PR spin to his advantage, it also reveals to us how this guy was able to manipulate the global elite for decades. His personal brand was a world synonymous with power, wealth, influence, and status. He knew when he gave people access to that world, he could start to control them by holding up the mirror and showing them what they desperately wanted to see. And what better way to lure in the mighty and powerful than with a siren song promising beautiful girls and women in paradise? In my world, a good mirror is one that shows you the truth about your brand and your business. So if you feel invisible despite being an expert in your field and you want to increase your perceived value so you can rise to the top and stand out without selling your soul, then book a free strategy call with me and I'll show you exactly how to turn your expertise into a magnetic premium presence that doesn't require a mask to work. And let me know in the comments, what is the most chilling or revealing part of the interview for you? And I will see you soon.